Pikmin is a delightful little Nintendo series of real-time strategy puzzle games that usually tell the story of people from space arriving on a distorted version of Earth, home to the Pikmin, an invasive species that team up with you, the player, free to be commanded in order to wreak havoc upon the planet's ecosystem to meet some kind of goal: survival, money, food, or saving people. But with Pikmin 4 taking over a decade to be finally coming out, Pikmin fans have been driven to near insanity, where one of the few things to even talk about at this point is looking at the same two games all the time and trying to determine which form of eco-terrorism is better. Now, Pikmin 2 and 3 specifically both handle being a sequel in incredibly different ways, so much so that people usually distinctly prefer one over the other for many reasons. In figuring out what makes a Pikmin game enjoyable for me, I've narrowed down a selection of categories into a whole complicated system with different point values assigned that will determine which game is better, or more likely which one I just prefer. First up, plain and simple, I'll be comparing the story and motivation for a combined total of up to 5 points for each game. It's more fun to be immersed in a world with engaging plot, character, and world development to whisk you into a magical land and put some stakes and incentives behind what you're doing. The next category is aesthetics and style, aiming to measure the level of enjoyment I got from the game's artistic expression, what kind of mood the game creates, and how well it creates a distinctive tone and style. I'm mainly awarding up to 10 points here for the combined quality of mainly graphics, artistic direction, and the soundtrack. Then lastly is gameplay, easily the most important part of the game. It encapsulates the challenge asked from the player, the enjoyment, the sense of achievement. It takes up the majority of your experience with the video game, who would have thought? So I'm awarding 5 points for each of the subcategories of controls and abilities, general combat, puzzles/level design, and the bosses. That means there'll be a maximum of 20 points available in rating the gameplay. So as I break these games down to their very core, remember, these are just my opinions on how much I enjoy the execution of all these things. That's the entire point of this video. And if you don't enjoy certain things the way I do, or vice versa, that's totally fine. Do whatever you want, I don't really care. This is just a way to compare my experience with these two games that I love, and which one left me more satisfied as a Pikmin game, and hopefully explains why. Oh yeah, and full spoilers for both games. Pikmin 2 picks up right where the first game's true ending left off, with Olimar successfully escaping PNF 404 with his rocket ship fully intact, arriving on his home planet of Hocotate, giving us an appreciated glimpse into the world we've heard so much about in Pikmin 1. Unfortunately, his time home lasts all of 2 seconds, as Hocotate Freight, the company that employs Olimar, has gone broke. Apparently Louie, Olimar's co-worker, was attacked by a space bunny that ate all of his golden pick carrots intended for delivery, which sounds incredibly real. And so the president of Hocotate Freight took out a massive loan of 10,000 Pokos to pay for the mishap, and has now sold all of the company's assets to repay the loan, including, and entirely limited to, the SS Dolphin that we spent the entire last game rebuilding. No! At the risk of losing his job to support his family he worked so hard to reunite with, Olimar and Louie are assigned to scavenge the numerous treasures on the planet we've just returned home from in order to repay the debt. This is all presented with very cute animated cutscenes with silly dramatic music and sound effects to back it up. It's very lighthearted and builds upon the rather comedic elements of Pikmin 1, back where Olimar literally couldn't achieve the best ending of the game until he obtained his piggy bank. Returning to explore uncharted territory on PNF 404, Olimar reunites with the Pikmin and discovers countless treasures, both on the surface and in the depths of the dungeon-like caves. The debt is of course paid off, and oddly, without having to complete like half the caves in the game, Olimar heads home, but Louie the idiot is somehow missing, and so the president joins Olimar to find him, and of course to try and collect all the rest of the treasure on the planet. So you keep going, keep exploring, keep playing the game, when you finally reach the end, and find Louie sitting unconscious atop a pile of treasure that is secretly the Titan Dweevil, the final boss of the game. But there are so many other little details and bits of charm to this story, mainly in the treasure hoard and Piklopedia. Not only are treasures cute little rewards, and they used to be references to real brands in the original game, but they also have descriptions alongside them from Olimar for every single one, characterizing him quite nicely. Louie notably also has a recipe on how to cook every single bug in the game. Stuff like this, and all the mail you receive at the end of the day, just piles charm upon charm to this weird little game, and it makes a comedically dark and thus very enjoyable story with the characters behind this game. The final extra little detail is that if you look hard enough, alongside the letters to Louie from his grandma, it seems Louie has a bit of an unsettling bond with bugs, you know, with those weird cooking recipes from earlier, and titling himself King of the Bugs, where Olimar wonders just why Louis was unharmed by the Titan Dweevil, and perhaps he was controlling it to some extent. Anyway, Pikmin 3's story is a more serious take and paves the way for a grander adventure across like half the world. So Elf, Brittany and Charlie take over as the playable crew for this game and are on a quest to save their home planet Kopai from starvation. These are much higher stakes and they need to collect enough food for the player to even live on to the next day, although that's not that hard. On their quest for food, they stumble across notes from an elusive Captain Olimar, never sighted until the final boss of the game. But Louis does show up halfway through, we save him, but then he steals all of our food built up over the trip and f***ing dies. We save him again from a big scary boss and then head to the final area. This is where we find the Plasm Wraith, this creepy thing that takes a strange fascination to Olimar, who's unconscious while being caressed by this wiggly demon. We manage to destroy it, but then as we escape, it's somehow alive again, which is oddly terrifying, and I kind of like it building upon the weirdness of this planet. There's even suggestion that all the crashes on the planet from these space explorers may not be an accident at all, perhaps something to do with the strange creature at the center of the planet. Pikmin 3's plot and motivation are definitely fun, but it's simply not as developed as 2's, and the characters don't really stand out all too distinctly. The story is a bit more intense though, especially with the weird implication of the Plasm Wraith. But for Pikmin 1 and 2, our protagonist is a wholesome and caring dad, and we get a little personal reflection from him at the end of the day, longing for his family and all that stuff. And Louis is a piece of shit and we love him. I'm giving Pikmin 2 a 4 out of 5 and Pikmin 3 a 3 out of 5. Fruits really just aren't as interesting to collect when you could be collecting a decapitated Rob. Just saying. Pikmin 2 was made in 2004, so obviously doesn't have the highest graphical fidelity, but it still manages to be colourful and vibrant regardless, with a seasonal theme across the overworld maps of winter, spring, autumn, and sort of summer with the Perplexing pool, but not really. That one pretty much just looks exactly like the distant spring from Pikmin 1, unable to disguise the fact that it literally just is. But where the style really comes through is in the utter bizarreness of the caves in this game. They're kinda creepy, they take on nonsensical appearances with bizarre themes of a child's play area, grass areas, sometimes having sunlight somehow, sometimes having snow like 50 layers deep underground despite the holes being not even close to directly above each other. But it's this absurdity that furthers that overall Pikmin theme of a slightly nightmarish distortion of our own home. These pool tiles forming this kind of arrangement as the most distinct style of this effect is quite freakishly unsettling to me. Oddly nostalgic, but wrong at the same time. Maybe I'm insane, but this aesthetic is very cool to me and makes you wonder just what the hell is wrong with this insane version of Earth. They also have very appropriate soundtracks alongside these sub-level themes, either oddly soothing or fittingly abrasive and unsettling. But there is only a set amount of these themes that repeat throughout the caves, and that gets quite repetitive and of course loses the intrigue after a while, like, yeah, this area looks the exact same as I've seen like 100 times, and some of them also just look very boring. Pikmin 3 in comparison is stunning. We're a lot more defined in where we are this time, travelling around a concept of Pangea Ultima, where at some point in the future the continents largely re-merge. Of course, in such a far-off future where this would happen to Earth, there are drastic changes to biomes across these land masses, my favourite being Antarctica becoming a tropical wilderness. It messes with your sense of familiarity in that special Pikmin way and just makes something we know plainly wrong. It's so interesting to imagine a far-off future where nature just keeps moving on past humanity, a world we'll never get to see, because that's what will happen. The Garden of Hope, Tropical Wilds, and Twilight River I believe are the most stunning visually, being gently guided down a flowing river on a giant lily pad with the whole river circling through an autumn woods, holding a large tree at the center as your final test to leave the Twilight River. It's presented so delicately, just for one example. And the music in all the areas is beautiful, as it is in both games, with many different variants depending on what you're doing in the game, but 3 has loads of accompanying environmental sound design to really throw you deep into the ecosystem. I felt this hard in the Tropical Wilds. That area is simply a visual and audio delight. Unfortunately, it isn't entirely perfect, as the distant tundra isn't the most visually striking to me, with fairly dull and dirty colours used all around, and the Formidable Oak starts out very fittingly with a harsh, oddly lush desert to backdrop your final battle, but then wastes most of it, throwing you into a cave for most of your time there. In the end for aesthetics, Pikmin 2 scores a 7 out of 10, and Pikmin 3 a 9 out of 10. Now Pikmin 2 plays basically exactly the same as Pikmin 1 at its core. Aim the Pikmin, throw them, you get the gist. Now with less tripping over, which is fantastic. The game introduces a second captain for you to manage with Louie, where you can either split them up to multitask certain things, or have them in the same group. The game also adds quality of life upgrades as you play to make your experience a lot nicer, like faster speed, hazard immunities, and especially with the pluckerphone that lets you whistle to instantly yank Pikmin out of the ground. Oh, and there's also the ultra spicy and bitter sprays, spicy speeding up Pikmin actions, which can be quite helpful at times, and the bitter spray freezing enemies giving you a bit of trouble, but I could never really be bothered farming that one to be honest. It's pretty helpful if you want it though. I felt it was fairly cheap, but not really worth the time it takes for grinding them to me. The game most notably adds 3 more Pikmin types to your arsenal as well, all of which limited to caves, first up being the purples. These guys are broken. They carry and run slower than the average Pikmin, but one singular purple can carry with 10 times the average carrying strength, which is actually really cool and helpful. But they also have a ground pound stun attack when thrown, which does a ton of impact damage and kills enemies so fast with a small group of them. This kind of thing is completely overpowered, and so if you manage your purples even just slightly well, you'll probably always have enough to absolutely obliterate most of the regular enemies in the game, even electric and fire enemies, which you'd think would be better for yellow and reds, but are not somehow. This contributes to the game feeling extremely easy at times. Then there are the white Pikmin, which I'm glad to have around, immune to the new poison hazard, can work and be thrown a lot faster, and deal a ton of damage to enemies when eaten. I like the addition of white Pikmin a lot. Then there are the Bulbmin, which can really help you out in caves by giving you some temporary Pikmin that won't leave the cave with you, but are immune to all hazards. They're parasitic Pikmin that have infected bulbs, which is a very fun idea and can be a bit of a thank god moment when they show up to join your dying Pikmin squad. Pikmin 3 in contrast only introduces 2 Pikmin, the rock and winged Pikmin. The rock Pikmin have a lot of impact damage when thrown, like a bunch of rocks, but have a hard time latching onto enemies, so are great for bursts of damage. They may be a bit too strong, but not as bad as purples, and offer an alternate attack style on top of just throwing reds to latch on and auto attack. There are also ones capable of shattering glass or crystal-like substances. In contrast, the winged Pikmin are next to useless in combat, besides the rare occasions where enemies can fly. Basically that one part of the Scorn at Maestro fight. But they're a joy to introduce for puzzle solving, able to fly over water, and thus also carry things over water and all that good stuff, definitely enhancing one of Pikmin 3's best qualities, that being puzzle solving. As for the abilities of the captains, we have 3 this time, and we can also throw them now to reach certain ledges or cross gaps for more complex puzzle solving. But they also can be instructed to move around the maps independently, which fleshes out the idea of instructing multiple captains far better than 2 does, allowing you to multitask super efficiently now. As for other abilities, however, I believe Pikmin 3 falters a bit. You get a charge mode and an auto lock on, making such quick work of basic enemies that it's not even funny. Shit dies so quickly in this game, and the auto lock just hands the aim to you for free. This was quite nice for my skillless first run of the game trying to get into the series in the first place. For sure, this game overall is an excellent first entry, but I wish you could turn it off, because it takes away so much of the skill from aiming at things properly. Sure, it's a convenience, but there's less skill expression involved, which isn't as fun to me. Oh, and you also can't move your Pikmin around as a separate group anymore, which kinda sucks too. I'm giving a Pikmin 2 a 4 out of 5, knocking off a point for purples being completely overpowered, and Pikmin 3 a 4 out of 5 for the lock-on problems. I don't have a lot to say about general combat in Pikmin 3, so we'll start here. The basic enemies always die so easily 99% of the time, just lock on and charge at them and it's instant death. This is playing on hard mode as well. There are some annoying guys, I guess. By that I literally mean 2. 2 annoying enemies in this game, this tongue boy and this crab in the water. That's it. There are some mini-bosses scattered around though, which are pretty fun to find and take down, but also aren't very hard either. Pikmin 2's combat on the other hand is partly affected by the abilities of the purple Pikmin, as mentioned before. They're insanely strong, but the enemies can still be quite tough anyway, and there are enough scenarios where they can't just ruin all the fun. The enemies in Pikmin 2 are rough, but it's a fun time trying to get past them and triumphing over them on a tough cave sub-level. This is probably where I should mention that at least 70% of the game takes place in these caves with just so many enemies. My first playthrough took like 25 hours, and so much of that time was spent in the dungeon-like caves that I feel reuse a lot of enemies in similar scenarios over and over again, clearly starting to spin its wheels. I still really appreciated the challenges that were set up with these enemies in the caves, enough so that obviously I kept playing and eventually finished the game. It wasn't a complete joke like Pikmin 3's combat basically is. I'm giving Pikmin 2 a 4 out of 5 for general combat because it gets repetitive sometimes, but the game overall is still an insanely fun challenge, but one best left for when you're truly ready to test your Pikmin skills. And Pikmin 3 gets a 2 out of 5. Pikmin 2 has very basic problems to be solved in levels, like break down this electric wall with a water hazard to overcome. You throw the Pikmin over the ledge and break down the wall, pretty simple. There isn't really anything that goes above and beyond this. Maybe that one treasure that makes you throw Pikmin over a wall and break down a wall from the inside, but usually you just match the Pikmin with the hazard presented to you. As mentioned earlier, the Perplexing Pool is just a distant spring from Pikmin 1, but the Awakening Wood is just the Forest of Hope, and the Wistful Wild is a combination of the Final Trial and the Impact Site. These two actually discussed pretty damn well, however. They play much more differently than you'd expect, with new hazards rearranged everywhere in addition to your landing spot casting them in a whole new light. It's also pretty fun trying to figure out how to get to the caves on the surface. It is still lame that you reuse old levels from Pikmin 1 though, but the caves are where we start to see some more interesting level designs start to pop up, like a whole cave focused on electricity, and one that's only accessible on the surface with blues, absolutely filled with water. That's a fun idea, and it was made 10 times more terrifying as I stood there puzzled thinking of how I was going to get past this fire dude with only blues. Then this dude shows up and destroys him, and I start screaming. This dude throughout the whole cave just steamrolls Pikmin and will show up on each sub-level if you're taking too long. It was terrifying and amazing. And just for one last surprise at the end of the dungeon when you think you're rid of him, but this is where we get to my huge gripe with this game that is enough to drive a person mad. Random, falling bullshit and hidden bullshit traps with no warning are not fun. That isn't level design that's thought through. I'm certainly not discrediting all the good the game does, but why does this game, of all the Pikmin games, not let you reset at the start of the sub-level or day after all my Pikmin were just instantly destroyed by a giant random boulder? I mean, yeah, I can turn the game on and off again, but it sort of feels like I'm wrong for doing so, lest I go insane just soldiering on, losing half my Pikmin to some random insta-kill trap that I had no way of knowing about. And to anyone who says, oh, just scope out where all the boulders and random bombs are in advance, why don't you go do that and report back to me how much fun you had? It's not interactive, it's just learn where this shit falls and get ready to back up with constant paranoia. The devs of this game are actively psychotic, and the level design of this game, with 25 hours of this BS, is an utter endurance test. Pikmin 2 gets a 2 out of 5 here because it's evil and so brain dead most of the time when there's no specific theme to accompany a cave. This game is also just filled with so much glitchy and unintentional bullshit, like this crap. This game. Pikmin 3 on the other hand has exceptional level design and puzzles. There are unique things to figure out that make use of managing multiple captains and all types of Pikmin across them, like this whole section of the Garden of Hope here. And there's all secret areas and bosses to access in older areas that you can revisit if you want to, once you get winged and blue Pikmin to claim all the fruits, which was pretty exciting to find, and I didn't expect it. A lot of the time the captains can be found split up across different levels, and there are paths and enemies to endure to uncover the bridge pieces scattered everywhere that are needed to reunite them. I think the problem solving and level design of Pikmin 3 is great, especially when the final boss's first stage is entirely about navigating through a maze and solving problems while protecting Olimar as you're hunted down by the Plasm Wraith. Pikmin 3 scores a perfect 5 out of 5 for level design and puzzles in my eyes. It's just some good solid fun. Now to wrap things up with the bosses. I think both games do bosses quite well, with Pikmin 2 bosses appearing usually at the end of the caves, and 3 holding 1 in each area, with the Garden of Hope having 2. Pikmin 2 bosses are very unique and tough to deal with, and are quite a bit of fun to try and figure out, whereas 3s are fairly linear in comparison. But the atmosphere and kinds of attacks of 3s are on another level, often being absolutely gargantuan and kind of terrifying. I think both kinds of bosses are quite deadly, but I enjoyed the greater variety in attacks that the bosses of Pikmin 3 have, as well as a super dynamic soundtrack that changes depending on so many factors of the boss, like an attack coming out or whether you successfully dodge the attack. I'm going to give Pikmin 2 a 4 out of 5 because of the high creativity of the bosses, but they can often be fairly tedious and stupid, like this guy who eats Pikmin through walls somehow, and the Titan Dweevil that takes a super long time to defeat, like a stupidly long amount of time of just cycling through the same 5 attacks that never change or evolve. Now for Pikmin 3, the Plasm Wraith especially is just such a cool sequence, chasing you through a whole maze trying to get away from this immortal demon, and then the fight needing all your Pikmin types to successfully defeat him. Whereas the Titan Dweevil of Pikmin 2 is usually best done with just a bunch of yellows, because they're the only ones that can reach up to the beast most of the time. I'm giving Pikmin 3 a perfect 5 out of 5 for this category. Now we end off this video with Pikmin 3 just barely taking the lead with a total of 28 points, 3 above 2's 25 points. Now I love both games a lot, and that's just my opinion on why 3 might be slightly better. But they're such different and unique experiences that I had a blast with both of them, and you shouldn't feel any more or less ashamed to prefer one over the other, obviously. It took this comparison to really determine which one I prefer, but it's by so little that, to me, it barely matters. They also both have some glaring weaknesses that I really hope to see fixed in Pikmin 4, because if they're not, it's probably going to be another 10 years till our next Pikmin game. Please be good, Pikmin 4, please!